Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of About Time with me, Chris Nichols. As you know, this is a series where I talk to people who do fascinating work that I want the world to know more about. And some of those people are leaders of major institutions, including our universities. And I'm delighted that one of those university leaders is with us today, and that's Dave Petley. Dave, I'm delighted that you're here. Thank you for doing it.
Well, I'm delighted to be here too. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation.
Yeah. Now, we got in touch because you're a man on the move and you're currently at Hull and you're going to be at NTU. And I don't know when you start. So, when is it?
Yeah, so that's right. So for the last 3 years, I've been the Vice Chancellor at the University of Hull. I will move in early December over to being the Vice Chancellor at Nottingham Trent University, NTU.
Yeah, brilliant. So, for folks, now, I have some people on this who will know what a vice chancellor is very well, but maybe some other people don't know much about university structures. Could you just say something about, well, actually, what a vice chancellor does?
So a Vice Chancellor is in effect the Chief Executive of a university. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. In most cases, the Vice Chancellor is the most senior academic in the university, so the most senior professor, so leads the academic activities, um, but also oversees everything else that the university does. And universities are independent charities regulated by the Office for Students. So it's a market-based system with a regulator, and the Vice Chancellor is the responsible officer to the Office for Students, the regulator. So in effect, I'm responsible for everything that we have to report to the regulator.
Great, thank you. That's a great summary. So, um, so you've been at Hull for 3 years. You're moving to actually to where Edward Peck was. Of course, Edward's
That's
going
right.
to or has gone to, I don't know which, be chair of office for students. So, what drew you to that role?
Well, the first thing is, I suppose, to go back a little bit to being a vice chancellor.
Yeah.
I'm a career academic. I left university at 18 and went straight into universities.
Mm.
So in effect, I've never been away from universities throughout my adult life. Um, uh, I had a fairly standard academic career right the way through to my late 30s. Became a professor at Durham, and then moved into a leadership role and progressively moved through to becoming a vice chancellor. Hull has been wonderful.
Mm.
I've really enjoyed my time here. It's a fantastic university. But Nottingham Trent is a quite a different institution. It's very large. I mean, it's the fifth biggest university in the country by student numbers.
Wow.
It's been fabulously successful over the last decade or so. So it represents a really interesting opportunity and challenge to me, and so that's why I'm moving on.
Mm, brilliant. Yeah. It'd be great to know something actually about your academic career because what are you a professor of?
So I'm a sort of hybrid of a geographer and an earth scientist. I have a first degree in geography and a PhD in geology. My area of expertise is in landslides. I've worked throughout my career on trying to understand how landslides work, why they
Mm.
happen, when they happen, or where they're going to happen, and also the social cost of them. So yeah, I've done a lot of work around landslides that kill people, where and when and how those landslides cause fatalities. And most of that work has been in high mountain areas in poor countries. So I've worked a lot in Nepal, northern India, Pakistan, um, in South America, and such like. So I sort of developed that academic career, and then I actually hit a kind of interesting point just before I became 40, where I had a chair at the University of Durham. It was kind of my ultimate career aim, and then just asked myself, well, what am I going to do next? Am I going to stay working in landslides, or will I do something else? And was offered the opportunity to move into leadership. I honestly had never considered it. I would never have thought of it as being my career direction. didn't really seem to fit my personality because I'm very definitely an introvert.
Yeah.
But I absolutely loved it, and I enjoyed it far more than I expected. So then sort of went through a career switch at that point over to leadership. But I have maintained my landslide career too. I still do quite a lot of landslide work. I still advise, for example, the Hong Kong government on managing landslide
Right.
risk, and I have a blog which I write 2 or 3 times a week about landslide events that are happening around the world.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Um, that's quite a juggling act to be a vice chancellor and keep up the academic work. So that's brilliant. But so I want to go back a bit to that first leadership job. Was that like a head of a school, or I mean, what was it?
So it was actually a faculty role. So at that point, Durham had strengthened its faculty structure,
Mm,
and Anthony Forster was the who went on to become the vice chancellor at the University of Essex for a number of years. I mean, very successfully so as well. He was the dean of the faculty at that time. And he asked me if I would go and basically run research strategy for the faculty. So it was a deputy dean role, looking after research. Now that played into my strengths because obviously research was really my main career direction. Um, it was fascinating because it was a new role
really?
that hadn't, the faculty hadn't had a deputy dean before in the research area, so it gave me a lot of scope to. Um, so I suppose to innovate and sort of direct things as I thought they should go, develop new relationships with heads of school and such like. So really very quickly found that it was enormously challenging, but very, very interesting role to have.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a role that sometimes people do and then go back into their academic career and no more leadership. I sometimes meet people like that, but generally by the time I meet people on the TMP, um, they're more into their leadership career than that. So what came after that Durham role?
So actually, before I moved into leadership, I also came up with the idea of a research institute for Durham, which we founded, and actually is now very successful. It's called the Institute of Hazard Risk and Resilience, and that's now been running for sort of 20 years. But I drove the development of that as I was an academic. So after doing the faculty role for a number of years, I then actually went back and became the director of that institute for a couple of years. And that was kind of great fun because that was a kind of combination of leadership and my own academic discipline. Um, and then there was a sort of one of these slightly strange twists that happens along your career, which was we were heading towards the next REF exercise. REF is the once every 6 or 7 year exercise that the government does to assess the quality of research in universities, and it's a big issue for universities, both in terms of money because it drives core funding, but also in terms of reputation. And there became concern across the university that in fact that the institution was not doing enough to prepare for the next submission, which was about a year away at that point. And there was a rather fraught meeting of the university senate in which concerns were raised, and the then vice chancellor the following day consulted on how to address it, and rang me that evening and basically said, I want you to take over. I want to create a role of deputy to the pro vice chancellor, um, to run the preparations for the next submission, and I want you to do it, and I want you to do it starting tomorrow. This was sort of 6 o'clock in the evening, and I said yes. So literally at 12 hours notice, I found myself sort of propelled into looking after quite a challenging position for the university. And over the course of the next year, we basically stabilised that situation, put a ref submission together, and successfully submitted. And Durham did very well in that ref, so it was a good outcome. And and then the university decided they wanted to maintain that role, but to widen it. So they also asked me to look after the kind of international activities of the
Oh wow,
institution as
okay,
well,
yeah,
and to lead on the development of a new research strategy. So I looked after that as well. And you know, I worked with the then Pro Vice Chancellor for Research, Tom McLeish, who was just absolutely wonderful. I mean, sadly he died last year, but he was a fantastic, very human, very supportive Pro Vice Chancellor. Taught me an awful lot about the way to handle that sort of role.
These
And
kind of, yeah, these role model people we meet along the way in our careers are incredibly important. That,
Yeah, that's right. And he was
yeah,
deeply, deeply human in everything that he did, and I learned a lot from. But Tom, in being Pro Vice Chancellor for Research, was also absolutely clear about the need to maintain an academic position. You know, to continue to be an academic even when you're in a leadership role in a university, not to lose that academic identity. Um, and that was partly because universities ultimately are academic institutions, and it's quite easy in leadership to get pulled away from being, recognizing that academic role. Um, but it's also about credibility, and in particular in the research role, that having that academic credibility is so important.
yeah.
And I've taken that through my career actually. That in being a leader in a university, it is really, really important to continue to be an academic and to be seen to be an academic.
Hmm. Okay. So is that one of the things that makes being a leader in a university different to being a leader anywhere else? In that, like, yeah, it's an academic organization, and therefore being an academic helps you to lead in it.
I think so. I mean, sometimes I have a conversation with
Mm.
with people. For example, my brother has a very senior role in the tech industry, and we talk
Yeah,
about the differences between the two.
yeah,
But one of perhaps the most important fundamental difference between universities and other organizations is the concept of freedom of speech. Um, and academic, in particular, academic freedom of speech. It is enshrined in law that we have academic freedom, which means that academics within their field of expertise are basically free to research what they want, and to speak their own mind, and we have to and really should protect that as universities. And that means that the relationship that a vice chancellor or a leader has with the academic community is really quite different from the relationship that most chief executives have within their organizations. In my organization, really our academic community are free to say what they want, without sanction, and you have to understand that is the freedom that they have. So an academic going onto social media to criticize the university is a very common thing, and an academic leader would take issue with that at their peril.
mm, yeah. So I'm starting to hear a couple of really important kind of facets of your leadership. I'm hearing that keeping your academic work going is really important, and there's something about the values of academia, the academic freedom, that kind of you're the ultimate steward and guardian of that. I mean, yeah. uh, I mean, how else would you describe yourself as a leader, and how would people describe you?
Yes, yes. I mean, when I came to Hull, I was. I mean, it's no secret that the University of Hull has not thrived over the last 20 years in the way that some universities have.
Right.
It's been a difficult time for the institution, um, and that I think is partly because it's been quite badly impacted by some of the changes to the way that higher education is structured, and partly because for a lot of people, Hull as a city is not seen as primary student destination. Although Hull is actually a wonderful student city. I mean, it is a really fantastic student city, and our student experience satisfaction is very, very high. But applicants traditionally have not seen Hull in that sort of way. And of course, at the time that I came to the university, we were also coming out of COVID,
Yeah.
with all of the challenges associated with that. And it became clear to me that I needed to be very visible and very present present at the university. So I've set out to be um, on the campus, really a lot of the time, to to try to create situations in which people, are able to talk to me, um, to encourage people as I sort of move around the campus and attend events and such like, to come to me and talk to me about the things that are going well and the things that are not going well and such like, and to deliberately to be not overly responsive, because as chief executive or a vice chancellor you can't respond to everything, but
Yeah.
to pick up the major themes that are emerging, and to try to systematically address the things that are causing concerns. And that's been challenging, at a time where, I mean, everyone knows that higher education as a whole sector is undergoing challenges at the moment,
Yeah.
but really to try to be uh, a vice chancellor that recognises the importance of the community around us.
Yeah. 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 So, I mean, that's really, really interesting. I think it's really interesting in relation to the Nottingham Trent thing as well, because I know, social mobility and community connection has been a big thing at NTU, and the link with Mansfield and all of that has been an important story. Yeah. Um, but there must be like a tension in managing your time, just physically managing your time, between being visible on the campus and being that external, ambassadorial almost voice of the university, where you're in front of loads of politicians and the press. And
Yeah, there is. I mean, when I joined the university, there was no deputy vice chancellor here. So in
yeah,
the first year, I was really taking on that combination of both the kind of externally facing role and the sort of internal leadership, and we have had to drive a lot of change at this university. I mean, you know, it has been a 3 year change program,
right,
out of necessity. Um, so at the end of my first year, I went to the University Council of the Trustees and said that actually it is essential that the university has a deputy vice chancellor as well as a vice chancellor, and that was partly because we needed to manage the magnitude of the change that we were driving, but also because I was aware of the fact that the kind of externally facing role was really suffering from the amount I was having to do internally. So so in my second year, we brought in a deputy vice chancellor, who has who has been absolutely brilliant. I mean, absolutely fantastic. Kevin Kerrigan, he came from Sheffield Hallam University, um, and that actually has allowed us to sort of partition the different responsibilities, and that has then given me the headroom to be able to do that more externally facing stuff as well as the internal role. I think if you're going to recognise the fact that universities are very complex organisations, you probably have to have a vice chancellor and a deputy vice chancellor in reality.
mm. And is the deputy vice chancellor the kind of chief operations officer, or is there one of those as well?
No, so we have a chief operations officer too. So as part of the big change program that we ran
Yeah,
here, we went back and agreed a set of principles, and one of the principles was that the academic community would always be led through the academic line.
mm,
So vice chancellor down, deputy vice chancellor, and then through the faculties,
yeah,
and every one of the members of the community who are on the professional service staff, would be managed through that route. I mean, ultimately, obviously, landing with me.
yeah,
So we have very clear separation here, that every academic is led through the academic route. Every member of the professional services and associated staff are led through the professional service route, and so we have a chief operating officer to
yeah,
to basically provide that leadership.
yeah. Mm. And how do you kind of make sure that the academic and professional leadership then stay works together? Because that can be quite a challenge sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in institutions where it feels like it's almost sort of two tribes,
Oh yeah,
sort of trying to
yeah,
achieve a common aim, but actually slightly at war with each other. I think there's two things. One um, is to actually be very values and outcome led for the institution.
yeah,
So it's about having a narrative which is about trying to achieve a certain set of things for the university. And sometimes I think you have to have calls to action for that, and
yeah,
then aligning the university, the whole of our activities around trying to achieve those outcomes. Um, that does lead to integration, and the other is to be very proactive in thinking through the way that the structures operate,
yeah,
to ensure that activities are collaborative, not in competition with each other. And that is partly about helping the academics to understand the ways in which the professional service community um, actually provide an essential kind of component into the ultimate delivery of the academic aims of the university. Um, but it's also about helping the professional service community to understand the complexities of being an academic, because academics are good academics are juggling huge numbers of balls simultaneously. They're teaching and assessing. They're probably running a research group, trying to win grants, supervise PhD students, doing external engagement, and all those things simultaneously. And very often on the professional service staff, they only see one element of all the things that the academics are doing. Someone once said to me that one of the things that you have to understand about an academic is that they essentially have to interact with every IT system that we have. It's kind of a trivial point, but
yeah,
it isn't a trivial point. They have to work with the HR system and the finance system and the student record system, and they have to work with the virtual learning environment, and everything else. And so it's no wonder why they get frustrated when they're having to manage all of these different
yeah.
systems
Well, do you know,
simultaneously.
nobody's ever said that to me before, but that's a really good kind of litmus test of how is the university, is how are all these systems, and can do they work, and what do I learn about the place by interacting with them? It's really
Yes,
valuable
I mean
stuff.
it is a really interesting thought, actually, and it does explain one of the reasons why academics get very frustrated with the IT systems, because actually they're just having to work with so many of them. I mean, it's a bit like parking. In every university that I've ever been in, parking is a vexed issue. But you can view parking as just white lines on a piece of asphalt, or you can view parking as being the kind of critical point at which people's home life and work life interact. If you're doing the school run and you have a 9 o'clock lecture and you arrive on campus and there's no parking, that is a crisis for you and an enormous stressor in your life. Or if you've got to pick up from your kids from school at 4 o'clock and your school gets cross with you because you arrive late and your parking space is 20 minutes walk away, that becomes a big issue in terms of your life. So parking can either be this kind of trivial thing which is just about space, or this kind of absolutely crucial point at which people's lives interact. And you have to understand as a leader these different perspectives on the same problem, I think.
Yeah. You see, tell you what, you're masquerading as an Earth system scientist, and actually, I'm hearing a lot of social geography and spatial placemaking.
Well, I do think geography is a really good training, actually.
Yeah. So my business partner will be delighted to hear it. She's a geographer. Uh, so we're about 25 minutes in, and I want and I get a sense of getting to know you as a person and a leader. And I'm interested. So, how is it to be leaving this organisation? I can feel your energy and your pride about it. I mean, what does it feel like to be leaving?
Um, I mean, I've loved my time at Hull, and I have so much respect for the academic community and actually the wider community in Hull and the Humber. It's been a hugely enjoyable experience, and I've learned so much here. Um, we've run a sort of 3 year major change program, and at the point where I leave, there really won't be a part of the university that we haven't led some major change on. We've restructured the academic faculties and the schools. We basically reorganized the whole of the professional services. We've changed most of our policies and procedures. We've done three big IT projects. We've rebranded the university. We've gone through the institution top to bottom, whilst managing obviously some significant challenges around, I suppose, the changed position of higher education as well. And I do think we've got the university to the point where it is really on a strong upward trajectory again, and I'm delighted that the university is in that place, and I'm really quite sad not to be there to enjoy the benefits of it, because I think
Yeah,
it's going to be very exciting few years now here.
it is.
Um, I feel very proud of what the community has achieved here. Um, Immensely grateful to them,
Yeah,
because they've really come on a big journey with us, um, and excited for the future for this university.
yeah.
But also, but also very, very excited about the institution that I'm going to move to.
Yes, Nottingham Trent calls. And um, how do you arrive? How do you go about preparing to arrive well?
So it's an interesting question that,
Mm,
when I moved to Hull, I was uh, a vice president at, pro vice chancellor equivalent at the University of Sheffield, um, and so it was actually relatively easy, to be able to start to get quite deeply integrated into Hull, um, whilst still do my role at Sheffield. There was almost no conflicts of interest, and geographically not very far apart as well. So I came over here every few weeks, got to know people, started to do a lot of reading and such like. It is more difficult moving from one vice chancellor role to another,
right.
because there is a conflict of interest that needs to be very, very carefully managed. I mean, clearly, these are two institutions that are in competition with each other around things like, recruiting students. Um, and so it is something that we're having to be very conscious of, that I am, the responsible officer to the
Mm,
Office for Students for this university. But actually, but I obviously also have a very strong interest in what happens to Nottingham Trent University.
mm,
So actually, the consequence of that is that whilst I am, getting to know people at Nottingham Trent University, and obviously I'm in dialogue with them, I'm being very, very careful not to be in a position in which, I either undermine the interim vice chancellor at Nottingham Trent, um, or am seen to be kind of getting into conflict of interest problem, and that means that the level of engagement that I'm having is lower than it was when I came here.
yeah. Hadn't thought about that. That's yeah, that's an interesting issue to be managed in the transition. Mm. So, do you? I mean, do you already have ideas or vision, or are you there in listening mode? I mean, how does one do this kind of thing?
Um, I mean, I do think that when you go to a new university, it is really important to spend a lot of time listening.
Yeah,
And actually, um, I mean, certainly my experience of coming here was, um, the things I'd formulated in my mind, about this institution were broadly correct, but the
yeah,
nuances really, really weren't,
right,
and the context most definitely wasn't
yeah,
correct. And so when I joined Hull, I set out in my first 3 months
yeah,
to basically go and visit every part of the university. So I think we organised 41, um, group meetings, face-to-face meetings for an hour, in which we had no script, no agreed agenda, and we didn't ask people to submit points or questions in advance. Just a completely open conversation. And
yeah,
I just spent, a really big chunk of my time going around and genuinely listening to people. What worked, what didn't work, what caused frustrations. Where were the issues? I mean, similarly, I did a lot of work with, meeting students as well, and also meeting people within the sort of local community. Um, and it really was only at the end of sort of 3 months that I was able to kind of, I joined in September, so at Christmas time, I then sort of sat down over a period of time and just thought through what I'd heard, and that allowed us to formulate a set of plans, which did require us to do quite a lot of change,
Yeah,
but was really genuinely informed by what I heard.
yeah,
And I would anticipate going into my new role doing something similar.
yeah. And I'm hearing in that a genuinely participative engagement process without formalizing a participative process. You can structure huge consultations, and I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing kind of a walking about, listening. Obviously, there were some events that, yeah,
Yeah, that's right, and I mean it has been really interesting that I mean this is University of Hull is a campus university. We only operate on one site, and I've really encouraged people just to stop and talk to me, and actually
yeah,
so often it's just those incidental conversations on the campus for 5 minutes that have been really kind of provided a sudden insight into something that's made me think, now I
yeah,
understand that now in a way that I didn't previously. And that is different from micromanaging. It's not that you go out and everyone brings you their individual problem and you go out and solve that particular problem. It is about sort of just pulling together different things that you're hearing to create a kind of coherent message of the things that you should then be organizing as a chief executive, or asking other people to look at on through their roles.
yeah, yeah. And I guess whatever whatever the situation, going in to lead any university, it's going to be a period of change. The sector is in huge amounts of change anyway at the moment. Your 3 years of leading constant change in Hull must put you in. You must have taught you some lessons about how change works and how it works well.
Yes, I think that's exactly right, and I'm not by any means pretending that we got everything right at Hull.
Yeah,
You learn an enormous amount from the things that don't go as planned, or the surprises that suddenly pop out the woodwork to bite you. And that is always going to be the case in any leadership role. Someone once said to me that one of the things you have to understand as a university leader is, I mean, assuming you've got 12 or more academic schools and more departments, and some have 40 or 50. You will always have an area that is in some sort of crisis. That is kind of inevitable. No matter how well functioning the university is, something is always going to be struggling. And you have to accept the fact that that is the kind of reality, and think through how to sort of systematically deal with those areas that are always going to be in some sort of challenge. And as soon as you put one right, something else will come along. Unfortunately, that's
yeah,
that's the way it's going to be.
mm, yeah. Now, this is kind of a left field kind of question, so forgive me for asking it. But you know, you've got a background in geography and physical geography and landslides and all of this. Is there anything in the academic frameworks, and just think of it as a metaphor for organisations and leadership? Is there any read across?
Yes, it's a really interesting question, and yes, there is. So let me give you an example from my
Mm,
from my academic career. In 2010, I got involved through an NGO working in Pakistan, actually one of the Aga Khan's NGOs,
mm,
in a landslide crisis that had developed up in Gilgit, which is in the Karakoram area of Pakistan. And basically what happened was a very large landslide fell into the valley. It killed about 25 people, sadly, but in landslide terms, that's we deal with much more serious events than that. But it blocked the valley, and a lake started to build up behind this landslide. and this area of Pakistan and actually many other areas, there is a terrible history of, eventually the lake fills, the water starts to flow over the top of the landslide dam, and the dam gets washed away, and so you end up with a catastrophic flood coming down the valley, and these things kill thousands, tens of thousands of people. And in this case, in 2010, a lake started to build. Actually, at its peak, it was 16 kilometers long. Um, and there were, just in the immediate downstream area, 14,000 people in the way of the flood. And this thing could have collapsed at any stage. So for 6 months, I worked with this NGO in essentially trying to manage that. I mean, absolute crisis. I mean, really
Yeah.
genuine crisis
Wow.
on the basis of very poor information. So we didn't have the means to do the sort of detailed investigation that you would normally do. And this happened in Europe, um, but we and there was very very little activity from the government or the army in terms of managing this hazard. So working with this NGO, we ended up moving 14,000 people out of the way of this event, when it overtopped. Now, actually, it didn't wash away in the end, so it's now a beautiful location. And we always knew that that could happen, but there was so much uncertainty. So trying to manage with that sort of crisis, which
Mm.
is very real and very acute, and you're trying to deal with poor information and different groups who have different perspectives on the hazard, and um, and it's all about communication. Who do
Yeah.
you tell
Yeah.
what? How do you stop communications running out of control? How do you keep things measured but controlled? I mean, I learned so much from that experience about how to manage a very different type of crisis that you
Yeah.
get in leadership. About understanding different perspectives, how you deal with incomplete information, and how you take different approaches to communicate with different groups to
Yeah.
try to keep them aligned around what you're trying to achieve.
That's a brilliant story. I love that story, and I can see loads of parallels. And it's also making me think one step more metaphorically about it. A lot of my work is around complexity in organizations, and you know, sometimes that lake that's building up is a lake of competing stories that need to be attended to. And the dam is, I don't know, metaphorically, a culture that's just strong enough to hold things together and at any moment may collapse. And I can see a metaphor a bit more extended.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's exactly right, and there are some really interesting things. I think So I mean, one of
Mm.
the things that we endlessly worried about was you know, I mean, we thought that the probability of it collapsing was probably about 30%. So there was a 70% chance that
Yeah. Yeah.
when this thing happened, nothing would happen. It would be fine. And it
Yeah.
was a sort of, well, how do we communicate now about the fact that this is a real risk, but there's actually, it's quite likely it won't happen. And how do we maintain credibility at the end of it if the thing is
Mm.
still intact? And so it does encourage you to think about, so often in leadership you're preparing for something that you're worried that might come along, um, and it either doesn't or it's not as bad as you fear it's going to be, and you have to think through, well, if this thing we're preparing for isn't as bad as we expect, what's the narrative going to be afterwards? I mean, for those of us of a certain age, we remember the Millennium Bug, the worries in the year
Mm.
2000 about the computer systems. And of course, that was nothing like as bad as everyone had feared. In part because so much effort was put into mitigating the risks that
Mm.
were associated with it. But there has been a narrative since about, oh, everyone was
Mm.
crying wolf about this thing, and understanding how you're going to manage that, I think, is really important.
Yeah. 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 There's a huge difference between crying wolf and rigorous, sensible preparation to make sure that something low probability but really serious doesn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Or when it does happen, that actually
Mm.
you have the measures in place that
Yeah.
allow you to mitigate it. And at a
Uh,
time where universities have had vastly fluctuating international student numbers, and our finances depend upon international student um,
yeah.
income. across the whole of the sector. I mean, we have seen over the last 3 or 4 years, um, some universities have had measures in place, which has meant that when those numbers dropped significantly, it's been financially very difficult, but they've weathered the storm. And a small number of institutions that really have not been prepared for it or have not responded quickly enough and have ended up in really very, very challenging circumstances. And
Yeah,
that is one of those things where, those institutions that had thought through that scenario, had the measures in place and enacted them quickly, it was okay. It was
yeah,
painful, and it's been painful for our colleagues, undoubtedly. But
yeah,
you were okay.
yeah. And we're right up against the time, and I know we could probably talk for days, but um I, I I want to ask you one more thing before we finish, which is, you know, this is not an easy job to do. It takes it being a vice chancellor takes up a lot of your life. I mean, what's the fire in your belly that why do you do it?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. It's a huge privilege. As a vice chancellor, you get to work with a lot of people who are just deeply, deeply passionate and committed about what they do. Universities are very exciting, very dynamic environments. The young people who study with us are fantastic. Just don't believe the narrative about students. They are amazing, just amazing people. So so that is the kind of thing that gets me out of bed every day. I've spent quite a lot of time reflecting on, academic versus leadership career, um,
Oh,
and and whilst I've really enjoyed my academic career, and I think I have genuinely made a difference in some key areas, I think I can actually have a bigger impact in leadership. And in particular, driving things like widening participation. At Hull, we've worked with a charity called Inter-University. We've opened 3 centres across this region since I've been here, actually working with the University of York as well, which is about enabling people from disadvantaged backgrounds to consider university as a career. I mean, that sort of widening participation act, it's just absolutely wonderful. And similarly, enabling fantastic teaching or giving people the ability to do wonderful research by winning funds that give them facilities and such like. I mean, it's just so impactful, and ultimately it feels like that is the way I can be most useful to society, I think.
brilliant. That's a good place to finish. Let me say a couple of words to close the episode, and I'll come back to say thank you to properly before we finish. So, everybody, thank you very much for watching and listening to this episode. You'll have noticed there are links to other episodes that have been featuring leaders, but also some of the ones around um, organizational stuff and complexity and mindfulness have all been reflected in here. So, I'll try and draw out some of the links in the notes to this one. Meanwhile, Dave Petley, thank you so much for coming, and the very best of you to you in finishing off this incredibly important role and starting well in the new adventure at Nottingham Trent.
Well, thank you very much. It's been hugely enjoyable and a great privilege to do it. So thank you.
No, thank you.